He hurried through a tangle of bushes to a clearing where several tourists had parked their cars. There was trouble afoot because most of them fled and locked themselves in their vehicles. The ranger brought his rifle with him, hoping he wouldn't use it because the region was grizzly bear territory. He sped past the cars but stopped at what he saw. When Brody decided to work as a park ranger, he only wanted to fulfill his childhood dream. He'd worked hard through school, finally getting a chance to train as a ranger. Before he knew it, he was patrolling the beaten paths of Yellowstone National Park, ensuring that everything was in order. But what would happen that day would show him that the wild was a place to be respected. Brody McCormick was your average 29-year-old ranger from Wyoming, United States. A lover of the outdoors and everything it brought, he enjoyed spending time in the wild where nature and peace intertwined. The only child to a botanist mom and zoologist dad, it came as no shock that Brody would forge a life steeped in biology. All his life, he'd wanted to be a ranger so he could protect wildlife. But that day, he'd find himself stopping instead of rushing to help. Brody grew up with the great stories surrounding the wild Yellowstone National Park. His dad, who centered his studies on the park's magnificent animals, always regaled him with these tales, ensuring that Brody's childhood was magical. But although these stories were always captivating, his dad never failed to inject caution within them. One, in particular, stayed with Brody through the years: the warning surrounding grizzly bears. Among the 3 species of bears native to North America, grizzlies rank second in terms of viciousness, nearly surpassing the white-coated polar bear. Grizzlies not only weigh between 700 to 1,700 pounds, but can be as tall as 5 feet when standing on their hind legs. An apex predator in most ecological systems, they're more than capable of climbing trees, swimming through most water bodies, and outrunning any human fleeing on their feet. Safe to say that antagonizing such terrifying spawns of nature should be the last thing on anyone's mind. Well, the woman in this story must have failed to get the memo regarding grizzly bears because she found out the hard way that these animals might look snuggly on the outside but are anything but. For many, Brody included, witnessing what the bear did to the woman was more than a cautionary tale that would doubtlessly be a lesson for many generations. The day the incident took place started like many others around the park. After a quick visit to the park office to run through the day's logistics, Brody hurried into the wild to ensure tourists enjoyed their time while respecting the park's wildlife. He took his regular route through the park, covering his assigned areas. He was about to return to the office for a quick rest when he heard the commotion. The sound was an amalgamation of tourists screaming and animal growls. Fearing the worst, Brody hurried to the source of the commotion, hoping everything was all right. The park had strict rules when it came to tourists viewing the animals. For one, they weren't allowed to be more than 100 yards from dangerous species such as bears. Although most tourists adhered to the set rules, a few wholly neglected them. You can already guess which category the woman falls into. Brody dashed through many bushes to a clearing where several tourists had parked their cars. Most of them were running away and locking themselves in their vehicles, which could only mean one thing: trouble was afoot. In the many months that Brody had been part of Yellowstone, he'd encountered several other visitors who didn't respect the park and got taught a lesson. While some usually came out of their duels alive, some didn't. Since the area was a grizzly bear territory, Brody carried his rifle, hoping he'd not have to use it. He dashed past the cars, but what he saw made him stop. Brody wasn't even close to the scene when he heard a deep roar. His heart paused as his mind registered the sound. It was a grizzly bear. But as he ran toward the commotion, hoping none of the tourists were getting mauled by the animal, he saw something that made him wish he'd been off duty that day. Brody's sight landed on the grizzly, a towering beast brimming with rage. But to make everything worse, there were smaller bears behind it. He bit back a curse. This was a mama bear, and if there was anything worse than a grizzly bear, it was one with cubs. He stopped for a second before his sight landed on the woman. Everybody was locked in their cars by now, except for the woman who was standing with her phone in hand. From the look of things, she was taking photos of the bear, which was not thrilled by her presence. The bear charged at her, and only when it was a few feet away did she turn to sprint. Brody knew he had to get to the woman. Mama bears are usually more aggressive than other bears because they seek to protect their young. And in many cases, they will turn anything in their way into a pile of flesh ribbons to ensure their cub's safety. Brody let go of his rifle and pulled out his bear spray can as he dashed to the woman. He was lucky the vehicles hid him from the bear's sight, or the situation would have ended differently. What the bear did next made him stop in his tracks. But to truly grasp the gravity of this situation, it is necessary to understand the woman's side of the story. Amanda Livingston was your ordinary mom looking to have a good time at the park. After a tough week at home, her husband and daughters invited her for a day at Yellowstone, hoping to raise her moods, which had been sour throughout the week. Amanda and her family came from Arizona and had spent hours on their trip to Yellowstone. This was their first time out here, and Amanda had her reasons for wanting to be so far from home. Like many moms across America, there was nothing Amanda loved more than her husband and kids. This love would send her across state lines, resulting in the dangerous face-off with the grizzly bear. But the week had been a difficult one for Amanda. Her firstborn child, Mindy, had been diagnosed with stage 2 blood cancer. Although the little angel had done her best to fight the condition, she needed around-the-clock medical care and watch. She would make a request to send her entire family north and into Yellowstone National Park. Little Mindy had fought enough to warrant the doctors to discharge her from the hospital. The first thing she wanted to do was visit Yellowstone to see the vibrant wildlife. Given the miraculous nature of her recovery and how lively she was, her parents agreed to her request. They had been stewing in endless worry for the last few months and saw the trip as a needed stress relief. They had no clue what they were signing up for. Among the things that Mindy asked for after leaving the hospital was to visit Yellowstone so she could see a real-life grizzly up close. While admitted, her family had gotten her a big teddy bear, which had been her closest friend while her parents and siblings were away at work and school. Her parents knew they had to make her dream come true. But disaster was just about to strike. The family packed their bags and boarded the first plane out of their state. After a few hours in the air, they found themselves in Wyoming, ready to begin their adventure in the national park. But that same night, trouble came knocking. Mindy, who had been doing great throughout the journey, suddenly began complaining about a head-splitting headache. But that wouldn't be the least of her parents' problems. Amanda and her husband jumped into action as soon as Mindy fell under the weather. They tucked her in bed and put on her favorite TV show to help her relax. They also checked her vitals, discovering that her condition was more than a simple headache and fever. Although they hated to admit it, this new development would demand a change in their plans. Amanda and her husband didn't want to tell their daughter that she could no longer go to Yellowstone. Her condition demanded them to take her to the nearest hospital, where the doctors admitted her swiftly. But as the family sat beside her, watching as the night turned into dawn, Mindy would wake up and ask her mom for a favor. "I know I am not going to the park anymore, Mommy," Mindy said with a weak smile. Her doe eyes blinked back tears, and her smile receded. "It's fine," she added. Amanda had to stifle a sob. "I'll get better. Stronger," Mindy said. "I promise." But as her mom's tears finally flowed freely, she made her request. "Would you still go to the park?" Mindy asked as her lips curved again. "Take everyone and have fun." She had always been an awing child in the most beautiful way. Although Amanda would spend the morning turning down the offer, Mindy would insist. Her final words before she fell asleep would have Amanda and her family driving to Yellowstone. "Take pictures of the bears for me, Mommy," Mindy said while drifting in and out of consciousness. The medicine in her system was finally taking effect. Amanda nodded with a wipe of her tears. The week had already been a difficult one for her and her family, but her daughter had recovered and asked to come here. She would do anything to make her smile. Amanda took everyone to their rented vehicle and drove to Yellowstone. But even though the experience was supposed to be calming, it left her lost in her mind as she worried about Mindy. Her husband drove her to a family of bears, and Mindy, alongside many other tourists, came out to a derir them. Mindy took out her phone, unaware of what was about to happen. Amanda was lost in her mind as the mama bear charged. She snapped back to reality when it roared, turning to sprint to her car. Officer Brody was already making his way to her, hoping to get there in time before the bear made an example out of Mindy. But as he was closing in, the unexpected happened. With a warning roar, the bear screeched to a stop before turning away. Amanda jumped into her car, a smart move because she was out of the bear's view. What the bear had done, a mock charge, is usually meant to warn intruders that they are invading the bear's personal space. She would have been done for if she didn't run when she did. But although she was safe from the bear, the state's legal team would teach her a lesson she'd never forget. Amanda went to court and relayed her story. She apologized for her behavior, saying her worry over her daughter had drowned out the danger in her immediate environment. She pleaded with the court to be lenient with its fine, stating that her family was already going through a tough financial and emotional time. She hoped her case would be heard. Amanda got fined for breaking the park's rules, though the court lowered the charges due to her honesty. She went to jail for 4 days, paid a sum in damages, and was barred from entering any national park or reserve for a year. She knows how lucky she was to survive such a scary attack. Many people who antagonized bears in such a manner weren't as lucky as she was.